but I like to keep life simple. So in my head, when I exercise and when I eat right, that means I'm going to be healthy and I'm going to lose weight. But then I know you can laugh, it's fine. Because then I go to the gym and I learn all about this stuff called the difference between cardio and weight training. And I learned that muscle weighs more than fat. So when I weight train and gain weight, that means I'm gaining muscle and not fat. And I agree, Rita. I'm like, what? What does that all mean? And I just thought, exercise, eat right, lose weight, get healthy. It's simple, but yet it's not. I have friends who are so healthy. They're gluten-free and they're whatever else free, because I don't know that stuff. And they're so healthy and they work out, and yet they still get sick. It makes no sense to me, because it's not simple. It's not just working out and eating right. It's more than that. And so when we read our Deuteronomy text today, it's tempting to think it's simple. All we have to do is follow the commandments of God, and then we'll be prosperous. We follow the commandments of God, and our dreams will come true. But then, bad things happen to good people. People that we know are following the commandments of God, are good people. And yet, suffering still happens. So it's not simple. Life is not simple. Faith is not simple. But we also read today that we are given everything we need by God, by prophets, by the church, by other people. We are given everything we need so that in the good times and in the bad times, we can see God and God's purpose for us. So as we read Deuteronomy, it's tempting to read it through what's called the prosperity gospel lens. You might have heard of prosperity gospel. It's the idea of what you give to God, you will get back, and maybe even some more. So if you give money to God, you'll get money from God. If you give love to God, you'll get love. And so it's this whole idea of give, but then you get more. And that's, as we read, if we follow the commandments of God, we'll have livestock, we'll have land, we'll have all this really good stuff. But then we also know that the Israelites, just like God knows, will eventually turn from God to their own selfish ways. So God says, I've given you these commandments, these laws to live by. And we often think of the law as kind of a chain that enslaves us. It's this burden that God has put on us. But really, the law is a gift. Because God knows life, as much as we want it to be simple, is not. It's full of suffering and confusion, and it's full of really difficult things. And so God says, I want to help make your life simpler. So God says, don't steal. Then you don't have all of the pain and the frustration of getting caught up in lies and stealing and all of that. So God says, I want to try and help your life to be easier. So I give you the gift of the law. But God knows, and we know, that we're going to break that law, that we're going to turn from God. And we know that when we turn from God, it only leads to destruction. We talked about that last week when we talked about living by the flesh or living by means of the Spirit. And so God is saying, if you follow the laws, it doesn't guarantee that life will be simple, but it does help us to guide us on life's path that is full of confusion, is full of, yeah, but what about this? And the good thing is that God says it's already here. The law, the commands, everything that we need to walk through this difficult thing called life, God's already given us. We don't have to send someone to heaven to get it. We don't have to send someone over the sea to the end of the earth to get it. It's right here, right now. God has given us Moses. God has given us the prophets. God has given us Jesus Christ and God's holy word to help us understand this really difficult thing called life that we want to be so simple, but yet is very difficult to understand, which moves us into our gospel reading. So the New Revised Standard Version that we read today says that a lawyer comes up to test Jesus. But really, lawyer is not a good translation of who that person was. It was a man who was very, very well versed in Jewish law. Not necessarily what we would think of as a lawyer, but very versed in Jewish law. So when he comes up and says to Jesus, what do I have to do to inherit eternal life? Jesus says, you already know. You're a master of Jewish law. So what does the law say? And of course, the man answers correctly. He quotes Deuteronomy 6:5 and Leviticus 19:8. Love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus says, see, you got it right. You studied. And so he got it right. So Jesus says, just go out and do it. It's simple. And then the man, to make himself look even more right, because he wants to justify himself, asks a brilliant question, and one of the most difficult questions that we deal with, which is, who is my neighbor? If I'm called to love God and love my neighbor, who's my neighbor? So then we go into this parable that we all know as the Good Samaritan, but that is actually a really horrible name because it goes back to this idea of prosperity gospel. If I am good, then I will get good. If I am bad, then I will get bad. It's not the Good Samaritan because Jesus isn't asking who's the best, who's better than somebody else. He's not asking what's good and what's bad. What Jesus is trying to explain is, who is my neighbor? So a better name would be the neighborly Samaritan. So Jesus starts telling this parable, the neighborly Samaritan, by starting out saying there was a man, and Jesus doesn't tell us who this man is. He just says it's some man who's traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho. So remember, Jerusalem is where the temple is. So they're coming from Jerusalem to Jericho, and on the way, he's beaten almost to death, and then just left there to die. Now, based on the 3 people who come by after that, we assume that the man was Jewish. And I'll get into that. But so let's assume that the man who is robbed is Jewish. So the first person that comes by who could help him is a priest. Now you would think a priest would know to stop and help. It's a leader of the temple. They spend their whole entire life studying law and knowing what is good. And so you would think that they would stop. But the priest doesn't. He goes around and goes on the other side of the street. So the second person that comes by is also Jewish. And this is a Jewish Levite. A Levite is a priestly person from the tribe of Levi. And so they're not to the same level as a priest. They're actually just one level below what a priest would be in the Jewish temple. So again, someone who is in leadership in the Jewish temple in Jerusalem comes down on the way to Jericho, comes upon this man, and instead of helping, again, crosses to the other side of the street. So now we have a third person that comes by. And this third person is a Samaritan. Why a Samaritan and not something else? Because remember, every detail in the Bible is important. It's there on purpose. So Jesus, on purpose, chooses a Samaritan for this story. Now, we might not know the history of Samaritans. So, Jews and Samaritans hated each other because a couple of reasons. Samaritans, first and foremost, were from the northern kingdom of Israel. And there's the southern kingdom of Judah. So the northern kingdom of Israel had Jews, and the southern kingdom had Jews. The southern kingdom had Jerusalem, which is where the temple was, remember? And in the temple, there is the Holy of Holies, where they believe God lives. It's the holiest place on the planet, is the Holy of Holies. And so, the southern kingdom of Judah has the capital, Jerusalem, where the temple is. So the northern kingdom of Israel says, we want a temple too. So they built on Mount Gerizim their temple. Well, that didn't make the southern Jews very happy, because it's blasphemy. You can't have a second temple. God lives in one space, and that's Jerusalem in the Holy of Holies. Period. End of discussion. So, of course, the southern kingdom Jews were very, very upset with the Samaritans. Now, the second thing was the southern kingdom of Judah was exiled to Babylon when the Babylonians came in, took over Jerusalem, and annihilated the temple. So they go off to Babylon, and they spend years there. So what do the northern kingdom Samaritans do? Their houses are empty. Their livestock are just chilling there. They have land that needs to be farmed. So they come down and they live there. They take over that homestead. When eventually the Israelites who were exiled to Babylon come home, and what do they find living in their homes? Samaritans. So, between the temple and taking over their homes, they hate Samaritans. And so out of all the people that could have come to help this robber, or this man who was robbed and beaten and left to die, out of all the people, it's a Samaritan. Can you imagine a Samaritan helping a Jewish man? They hate each other. And yet the Samaritan was able to see beyond that, to see beyond their history, to see beyond all of the hateful, hurtful words, all of the hateful, hurtful deeds, was able to see beyond that, to see the man's need and to help him. So my question for us today is, if Jesus was to retell the story of the neighborly Samaritan today, who do we think would be the Samaritan? And who do we think would be the man who was left beaten to die on the side of the road? If people are as frustrated with each other as a Samaritan and a Jew, who would be that people today? Would it be a Christian and a Muslim? Would it be a black man and a police officer? Who would be the people of today that would represent that those characters in our story? I think it's interesting for us to think about that. Because often we want to be the Samaritan in the story. We want to be the hero. But let's take ourselves out of the story for a minute and look at it as who would be the Samaritan and who would be the man who was robbed today. Because we have a tendency to think, oh, it's easy, right? We see somebody who's half dead on the side of the road, we help them. Simple. Love your neighbor. Simple. Until our neighbor hurts us. Until our neighbor disagrees with us. Until our neighbor frustrates us and we begin to hate. And it's not quite so easy to love our neighbor as ourselves. We like life to be simple. You study, you get an A. You exercise, you lose weight. But then we realize life isn't quite that simple. But God has given us everything we need. Everything we need to work through all of this difficult stuff in life so that we can walk the path that God has put before us. And so we can truly love God and love our neighbor as ourselves. Amen.